Listo, podemos comenzar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We resume our talks and begin with our guest, whom I consider my friend and who I appreciate for her work and career. Welcome, Silvia, and thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to give a brief. I'm going to read her video data so everyone can know what Silvia has done and what is her career. Silvia is an engineer in computer systems, Technological Institute of Colima, Master in Information Technology, Monash University of Australia, and PhD in Computer Science, Université Paris 8, Vincent Saint-Denis, France. C'est bien sûr? She worked for more than 10 years as production coordinator at the Centro Universitario de Producción de Medios Didácticos, and now Dirección General de Recursos Educativos at Universidad de Colima. And since 2004, she has been full-time professor at the Faculty of Telematics. She's the head of accessibility at the IHCL Lab, Human-Computer Interaction Laboratory at Telematics. Her research interests are human-computer interactions, digital accessibility, usability, and educational technology for inclusion. She has worked on projects focused on people with disabilities since 2006. Welcome again, Silvia, and thank you very much for accepting this invitation. As you know, this is a talk between friends, which I consider you my friend. And most of the people who are going to watch this video or listen to this talk, most of them are students. So I'm very sure that they will be very interested in what you say, what have you done. So just feel free to talk and say whatever you feel necessary to make yourself understand.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, Fernando. I'm really glad to be here. I like actually hanging around or giving talks to people who are not from my same area, because I think that when I speak to them or they speak to me, I learn a lot. And also because I think that our areas, or the area of technologies like the one that I work on, is not isolated, but it has a lot of things to share with other disciplines. And in particular, I have this, I made this talk, or I prepared this talk about learning a second language, but maybe from a, let's say, is probably not the traditional talk, because we'll be talking about deaf people who are learning a second language, or in their case, Spanish as a second language, as Mexicans born in Mexico. So let me share my screen.
Why a second language? Why do you consider it a second language?
It's because for
deaf people, they have a first language?
Yes, I will speak about that a little bit, actually.
All right, great.
A while, so that we understand the issues teaching Spanish as a second language to deaf people.
Deaf people, okay.
Let me share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Just give me a second, because this computer is kind of slow.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the reality, right? The reality of deaf people.
Yes,
Okay.
how it is for them to learn. I'm going to admit someone who's requesting access. Is that okay?
Sure, no problem. Go ahead.
I don't know why I got this message, but I did. I accept it.
You don't worry about it. Jorge Zavala can manage that.
Okay. So yes, this is my presentation. It's called Foreigners in Their Own Country, Spanish as a second language for deaf people. And I'm Silvia. I'm from, Fernando already introduced me. My area is not languages, but I love languages. And actually, this project is also about learning languages. So first of all, let's talk about how deaf people acquire their first language before we move into learning Spanish as a second language. So first of all, we need to consider that there is diversity of in the deaf culture. Deaf people are not necessarily those who are, let's say, completely deaf or deaf from birth, but there are some people who also identified as part of the deaf community, even though they may have hearing loss, like severe hearing loss, or people whose first language is the Mexican Sign Language, or any sign language, but in Mexico, it's the Mexican Sign Language. Most of the things that I'm going to share here consider mostly people who are deaf and who have never heard in their life, because they're probably the ones who have more challenges acquiring languages, their first one, and learning a second one. So first of all, let me mention that for deaf people, for people who are deaf from birth or who became deaf without or before acquiring a first language, their natural language is going to be a sign language. In our country, the sign language that I'm referring about is Mexican Sign Language, or LSM for Lengua de Señas Mexicana. That's their natural language. And that is going to be considered their first language, because it's actually is going to be very difficult for them to have Spanish as a first language when it's not their natural language, and since they don't acquire it at home. Let me go like step by step explaining some of these issues in the reality of deaf people. So you may find this kind of awkward, but the Mexican Sign Language was recognized as an official language in Mexico only in 2005. Only in 2005. That's like, I don't know, 20 years ago, let's say, just around the years. Yes, it's not much, right? I mean, we have had, deaf people have existed since the beginning of I was going to say humanity. I'm just guessing. But the thing is that, 2005 is really recent. Right. It means that before this, the Mexican Sign Language was not considered an official language in Mexico, and was definitely not considered like the first, let's say, adequate language for deaf people. So I wrote here, why does this matter? Look, the way, this is from the literature, it's not just my opinion, but the way that society sees disability and people with disability has a huge impact in the opportunities that they have, that people with disabilities have, participating in society. So a while ago, a long time ago, when people in general, society, thought that people with disabilities were not able to do the same things as people who are not born deaf or blind or with some other kind of disability, the opportunities that they had were very little, very limited, because they were not considered capable of doing the things that the people without disabilities do. So it means that the perception of people with disabilities in general is still changing. It's kind of recent, the respect that the human rights that are being recognized. That is something really recent. It's kind of sad, but it's the reality. So this means that, for example, in the 80s, let's say in the 80s and even the 90s, when deaf people tried to communicate in signs, even though there were like signs, you know, not the official Mexican Sign Language, but any sign to communicate their feelings and their thoughts, they were prevented from doing that. Actually, I have talked with some teachers and even the parents of deaf students, and they said, I remember that when I was young, we were not allowed to use sign language at school or at home, because the perception that people had was that they needed to learn a language. They needed to communicate verbally. Can you imagine that?
That's
So hopefully, I mean, thankfully, nowadays, this point of view, this perception has changed. So another very important consideration is that they usually don't acquire their first language at home or their culture. So for a hearing person, such as us, we learn our first language by listening to our parents, like in our family, in our home. So it means that since we are babies, we get all this information that we begin to process, like our brains get used to listen to Spanish in our case, or maybe Spanish and English or some other language. But since we are babies, we are learning that kind of information. And then eventually in a couple of years, we acquire our first language at home. We don't acquire our first language at school, for example. We don't learn it, we acquire it. But for deaf people, this is not possible unless they have deaf parents who already speak or use a signing language. It means that even in your own home, they will feel like they don't belong because they are not able to communicate with their parents and because they won't learn the language from their parents. This means that they need to learn them somewhere else or acquire the language somewhere else. They usually do this in their community, in the community of deaf people, in which they have deaf models. These models are models of language, like in the same way that we acquire a spoken language by listening to it, they will acquire a sign language by seeing it. They acquire it from other people who already speak that language or use that language. So actually, these are only a very few things about the reality. Learning the first language, I need to move on to the second language. But one of the main considerations that we need to observe is that because of their context, deaf people usually learn their first language or acquire their first language very late in infancy, sometimes even in their teenage years or even as adults. So can you imagine the frustration of not being able to communicate your beliefs, your thoughts during all those years before you acquire first language? It's very tough. And then it's also important because with language comes identity or belonging, the sense of belonging to a specific group. So without this, it's going to be very difficult to, to feel that you belong in a society. So before we move into the second language, let me just tell you some characteristics, very few, of the sign language so that you have an idea of why teaching or learning a second language as a deaf person is so difficult.
So one question, Silvia. For first language, we understand the sign language then?
Yes.
That's the first language, right?
Yes. So
okay.
It's a great question. You know why? Because we are in Mexico, we are Mexicans, we speak Spanish. Our oral language is Spanish. But deaf people who are also Mexicans and born in Mexico don't have the same first language, won't have the same language as the hearing people. So for them is the sign language. That already is represents a problem in communication, because in your own country, you cannot communicate with people with which you don't share the same language, okay? So these are some things I hope that they will be interesting for everybody. So sign languages are gestures that you do with your hands, your face, actually your arms, all your upper body. Also, the sign language has spatial movements. I mean, it's not just static, but it has special movements. In the image, we have the sign for thanks. We only see this image, but actually the thanks is something like this. Thanks. Thanks, or gracias. That is the sign. So as you see, it has movement. It uses more than one hand. It uses two hands. It uses a position in the body, and it has movement. Some signs that also have direction. When I mean something towards, I don't know, a verb that means that is directed to someone, it goes that way. And when it's directed to me from them, it goes this way, even though the verb is the same. So it has directionality as well. Unfortunately, I don't speak sign language. I don't use sign language. I'm starting to learn. I only know the very basic things. I wish I had more knowledge so I could share like more things with you, but I have some examples. And this is also a very important thing. Sign languages in general, not just the Mexican Sign Language, they don't have an official writing system, okay? It's not like we have an alphabet and we write the A in every country or language in which the Latin alphabet is used, the A will be the same. No. So there have been some efforts to come up with a writing system, but it's not officially accepted. So we can just say, they don't have an official writing system. So this has an impact in learning a second language, which is written, which has a written component. So, so these are some signs that I put as an example. Manzana, it's like, it has movement, as you can see on your cheek. So you can notice that it's not only about using one hand or both hands or the arms, but usually all the upper body. Okay.
I think that sometimes they even use the like the mouth.
Yes, every gesture.
Right? Okay.
Yes, with the face. So these are some examples. So, but not having a writing system it's a very important consideration. But because when you learn languages, I mean, any second language, in this case, Spanish as a second language, it means that you need to read and write amongst other skills that you need to acquire. So another thing is that the sign languages, even in Spanish-speaking countries, are not the same. For example, the sign language in Mexico is not the same language as in, I don't know, Panama or Cuba or Nicaragua, etc. So they don't share the same language, even though they are sign languages. And I have a video here, I hope it will work, on how to sign I love you in 60 languages. I'm not going to let the whole video run, but I would like you to get an idea of the differences. So let me move this. I have it here. So you will see the name of the country, and then you will see the sign. There is China, the Netherlands, Iceland, Hungary, India, United States, Japan. Can you check the difference? They're all saying I love you, or that is the feeling that they are conveying. I'm going to stop it right here. But they are signing in a very different way. I don't know if maybe there was more than one Spanish-speaking country in the fragment of video that I showed you, but they don't say I love you in the same way, even though, let's say, we speak Spanish. And that is another important characteristic. Okay. So even across countries who speak the same language, the signs won't be the same. So sign languages don't have a writing system, but they do have an alphabet. And this is the alphabet. The thing with the alphabet is that it doesn't work as in written languages. In Spanish, you want to say hola, and you write the H, and then the O, and then the L, and then the A, and then you pronounce it hola, right? So we have a correspondence of each symbol with what we speak, what we pronounce, and with the characters that we write. In sign language, they have an alphabet. It's not written, it's in signs. So this is the A and the B. Sorry, I was not on camera. The A, the B, the C, yeah. And the rest of the letters, but they don't use them for all purposes. They only use them for some things. For example, they don't speak in sign language in this kind of alphabet. They don't say H-O-L-A, okay? They say with the letter H, this is a sign for hola. One of the few things that I know. So it's the H for hola, for the way that the word is written, and then there is the movement. So this is one of the uses for spelling things. I mean, they used it for spelling things, such as names. For example, I can say the first time that I get to know a deaf person, or I'm going to introduce myself to a deaf person, I can spell my name. I will say, using the alphabet, I will say S-I-L-V-I-A. I have problems with the camera. But so I won't.
You only use one hand?
Yeah, for spelling, only one hand.
Okay.
Some letters have movement, the ones that you see with the red arrow.
Okay, I see.
But the thing is that I won't even say my name like that, or people won't refer to me by S-I-L-V-A-I. But when you get into the community, and people get to know you, deaf people get to know you, they give you signs so that you have a sign for your name instead of spelling the name every time.
Okay.
So let's say that is part of the deaf culture. And you cannot like make your own sign. As a hearing person, you don't make your own sign, but the deaf community assigns you a sign that makes sense to them, that represents what you are, Silvia.
Okay.
So when I introduce
based on what?
Based on usually in physical or personality characteristics, but mainly physical. For example, I am Silvia. My sign is the S for Silvia, and then they notice that I have a mole here. You see it? Okay. So they said Silvia will be the S and this movement in the place where I have the mole. Okay. So when they say, for example, left side. Yeah, like, hey, Silvia is here amongst deaf people, they say. Okay. They don't say S-I-L-V-I-A. Okay. No? And they all have their own name. So the point that I want to make here is that there is an alphabet, but it's not used in the same way that written languages use alphabets. Okay, that is another characteristic. Also, of course, being a full language, a complete language, just as Spanish, English, French, Russian, Chinese, whatever, it has its own grammar, a very particular grammar that has nothing to do with Spanish, okay? Nothing to do. And also there is not a direct correspondence with all the words. This is an example. So it's in Spanish because it's from Mexican Sign Language and in Spanish. In order to say, los niños venden dulces, we have 4 words, and actually we have 4 signs, but they don't correspond to each one. It's just a coincidence. How do you say los niños venden dulces? Okay, you use the sign for niños, and then you indicate that it's plural by doing this, ellos. You do the sign for candies, and then the sign for selling. So with those signs, you're saying los niños venden dulces, but as you can observe, there is no loss, right? There is no specific like article, or at least not in the same position or in the same way as Spanish. The order of the phrase is not the same as in Spanish. What I want what I mean here is that it's not Spanish. It's not a sign representation of Spanish. It's a completely different language altogether. It's another language. So we need to see it, to acknowledge it, to respect it as another language altogether in order to learn it. For example, we as hearing people, we can learn sign language, but not as a series of gestures, but as a formal language that needs to be taught with all the levels in the same way that we learn any other written and oral language. That's my point.
Okay, interesting. So we can say that in each word is has its own sign, instead of, as you said before, like spelling. We don't expect that people spell the sign. It's more like using a sign which represents a word.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes, but we also need to consider that even amongst words, there is not direct correspondence. There are signs that represent, that cannot be represented by a single word, but even, but with many words or even an explanation. Okay, so it's not Spanish. It's not sign Spanish.
All right.
It has its own rules, vocabulary, grammar, syntax. It's a full language.
Complete language.
Yes, that's why. So now let's finally talk about learning Spanish as a second language, as a deaf person, considering mostly that you might have some knowledge of a first language, but maybe.
Before we speak about learning Spanish as a second language, how do deaf people, you said that they learned sign language in their communities, right? So, but is it easy for them to approach the communities, or it's more like it's more like a job that the parents have to do, or what is the way deaf people approach to sign communities? Is it
that is a question like it's difficult to ask, to answer that question. You know why? Family plays a very significant role in the development of language in a deaf child, because it depends on the parents entirely, like to take their kids right away as soon as they notice that they have a problem with their hearing, to take them to a community. But parents not necessarily do this, and it's not so easy, to find a community that has all the support that the children need in order to grow, like developmentally. To grow in general, in culture and in language. But that is, a parent who takes their kids immediately to an association for the deaf, let's say, to the deaf community, is like the best case scenario, because we also have very nasty scenarios in which parents do not accept that their kid needs to learn sign language. Let's just remember that I'm talking about people, a very specific group of people, not every person who has a deaf hearing impairment. But I'm talking about people who are deaf from birth, or who lost their sense of hearing before they learned to speak their first oral language, let's say, before they acquired a first oral language. So yeah, sometimes the parents say, no, my kid is fine. My kid is fine. He or she, yes. So they are reluctant to educate their kids in the deaf community. So it's really a problem for the kids, because it just, I don't know, It's a really serious obstacle. And but that has been the case of some people that I have met. And yes, so it's not so easy, you know. But that has a lot to do with the way that society perceives deafness. Actually, it shouldn't be okay from the point of view of not being able to have a sense of hearing is a disability, but just from the medical point of view, because they are not really people with the disability in terms of the things that they can do, because they can communicate with with people who share their own language. They don't have any problem communicating, understanding other people, expressing their thoughts. Even going to school and getting an education shouldn't be an issue. It shouldn't be the issue that it is currently. And so in that sense, where is the disability? Right? Okay. It's just a different culture, in the same way that we don't understand someone from China if they don't speak Spanish, and if we don't speak Chinese and we don't say, I am disabled because I don't speak Chinese. Maybe I feel disabled if I'm in China and I am not able to communicate, but I'm not really, I don't have a disability. So it's not, I'm not trying to, on one hand, to minimize the fact that one of the senses is impaired, but on the other hand, from the point of view of their inclusion in society, they should not be considered as having a disability. So everybody as a society, we need to change the way that we perceive things. It happens the same with people with blindness. Okay, they are blind, so what? They can communicate, they can speak, they can read, they can write, you know. So it's a lot. We have a lot of work to do as in the communication of these kind of things, so that we understand that we are not talking about people with less capabilities. They just have different ways of communicating, either in a written way or in a signing way. But I think that we have a lot of things to learn about that. So since we are talking about learning Spanish as a second language for a deaf person, and we already understood that sign language and the Mexican Sign Language is as complex and complete as any written or oral language, we need to learn it in the way that we learn any other language, and they also need to learn it in the way that a foreigner learns Spanish. But there are some, it's not the same thing exactly. There are some considerations. So first of all, you know that the language activities from the Common European Framework for reference for languages, they say a person should be able to have these language activities: reception, production, and interaction. There is also translation. I didn't include it here. So reception means they should be able to listen and to read. Those are two ways of perceiving things, by reading it and by hearing. So we can immediately, probably it's logical to think that they won't be able to listen, but they can still develop the ability of reading and also of writing, even though they are not able to speak. So reading and writing are still on the table. Now, what are the things that are not the same? I mean, there is added complexity for a deaf person to learn Spanish as a second language. First of all, let's compare. A hearing person already acquired their first language before learning how to read and write that language. We already spoke Spanish before we went to school, and we learned how to read and write in Spanish, right? So it's not their same situation, because we already talked about all the inconveniences and all the issues that they have acquiring the first language. and they are not able to write it. There is no writing system for sign languages, no official way of writing. Also, when a hearing person wants to learn a second language, they are already fluent in their first language. Okay, sometimes they learn 2 languages at a time. We also need to consider that, but basically what I mean is that we already have a first language when we want to learn a second one. So it means that we already understand how language works and how to communicate in some language. But for a deaf person, we already know that they might not be necessarily, they might not be fluent even in their first language when they start learning Spanish as a second language. Is the situation of the children who are going to schools, either to special schools or to mainstream schools. This is their situation. They may be starting to learn or to acquire the sign language, but they are already going to school where they are asked to read and write. So can you imagine that? I mean, that's a really difficult situation for them to learn how to read and write Spanish. And also the other consideration, one of the main considerations, because there are so many things that I don't have enough time to explain, or that I don't even know, So another consideration is when a deaf person learns Spanish as a second language, we're speaking that this person was born in Mexico, but learning Spanish as a second language, they also need to learn a writing system at the same time, because they don't speak Spanish and they don't have any written language. So it's like a double complexity. Or an added complexity, because
barriers that they have to overcome.
Yes, it's like when we want to learn Chinese. We don't. I mean, it's not the same as when we want to learn French. We have the same alphabet or almost the same Latin alphabet, but with Chinese,
like a foreign language for them.
Yes,
Okay.
And it's the first time that they will be writing a language or in some language. This is precisely what I mean. So there's added complexity. And of course, there are other issues because they go to school, their teachers, they don't necessarily use sign language, because like in a fluent way, because of the same problem. I mean, if someone wants to learn the Mexican Sign Language, well, you should learn it as a second language, not just, hi, how are you? Hello, my name is so-and-so, but as a, they need to be competent in the language. And that is not necessarily the case. Sometimes it is the case, sometimes it is not. Also, one thing is to speak the language, to use the sign language, but another thing has to do with the teaching, with the pedagogical issues. For example, they might lack competence in teaching Spanish as a second language, which is not the same as speaking the language. For example, I speak English, but I don't know how to teach language as a second. I don't know how to teach Spanish as a second language. So
or the other subjects that teachers need to teach, like math or science, right?
Right. Yes, the contents, they also vary. So those are issues. And then also there might be a lack of understanding of the deaf culture, because we already mentioned that acquiring a language means having an identity inside a community. That is culture. So it's not just about speaking the language, but also knowing, having some considerations about the deaf culture. And also, last but definitely not least, is the way the school system, the way that that schools try to include deaf children in the mainstream education, or even in what they call the special education. Because, well, we already talked about it. When they go, let's just picture the following. There is one deaf student in a room full of hearing people. So they are reviewing their Spanish book, Libro de Español de Lecturas, for example. So there are so many differences, like the situation of every pupil is going to be different. Why? Because for the hearing child, they already know the language. They already speak the language. Maybe they are learning how to write it, but they're already competent in speaking and understanding the Spanish language. And for the deaf child, well, how can he be in the same situation as the hearing children if he hardly knows maybe their first language, and they're asking them to read and write in a second language, which hasn't been actually taught formally, or as formally as second languages are usually taught.
Mhm.
So
Or needed, no? Or
think
needed
about it.
for the purpose of being in school and learning.
Yes. So you may have an idea now of all the complexities that that they face. It's not easy, and a lot of things need to be changed. So I also I would like to very quickly mention some lessons learned from a project that we're currently working on. It's a project. It's a national strategic project to promote reading and writing skills in deaf children in elementary school. So what we have found, some of the things that we have found so far are the following. With the people that we are working, most deaf children in elementary school are still acquiring their first language. It means they still have communication issues there are still communication issues between the not just with the hearing people and the deaf people, but also communicating in sign language with other with their.
What ages?
Well, since we're talking about elementary school, it's like I don't know, 6 to 12.
12. Mm-hmm.
But the reality, like I mentioned, is that there are even adult deaf adults who are still acquiring, are in the process of acquiring the first language. Okay. So that is a reality in our country and in many countries, not just Mexico. Also, there is it's called a bilingual and bicultural model for teaching that actually started, that school started to use about 11 years ago, but actually even now only a very few schools use this model. And the way that they teach or that they use the model is not standardized. Like there are some recommendations like from the federal government on how to use the model, but in the end, well, there are variations in the way of implementing the model. Also, very few schools have deaf models. We already talked about deaf models. They are the ones who will teach, or from which the young children, the deaf children, will learn, will acquire their first language and their culture, because they lack that on their families. But unfortunately, in schools, there aren't many deaf models, which means that it's another barrier that children in schools are facing. Also, not all teachers of their children are competent in Mexican Sign Language, like I already mentioned, and they are neither competent or they need a little bit more training on teaching Spanish as a second language. Of course, this is the information, the things that the same teachers concluded. Okay, this is not my opinion. It's in the project there are participants from very different disciplines, and one of those group of participants are teachers of deaf students in elementary schools, or in the communities, in the associations for the deaf. So it's them who said, okay, yes, they realized, thanks to some exercises that we did, and with the support of a of a person from the linguistics department, they notice, oh yes, I still need some training, you know, on choosing my materials, preparing my classes according to the different levels of the European framework. So they are aware that they still need training on that area. So I won't go into too many details, you know, because we don't have much time, but basically I consider that we have a long way to go in every field, in every way, in a society, or even you as, you know, students of I don't know exactly the languages that you study in school, but definitely you care for, you know, you will be teachers of a second language for a lot of people. So, you know, or you will learn how this kind of teaching goes, and that there are some standard materials, standard language activities that you need to follow in order to teach that second language well. So if this is also teaching a second language, and the let's say the goals are not any different, but the way of reaching those goals are going to have their own characteristics. Well, that's all that I prepared, that I wanted to tell you. I don't know if you have any, I don't know, questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Silvia. That's very impressive. I think there are many more things to talk about. I would like to, for example, to talk about the project a little bit more in detail. I know that you are you've been working on this project for more than a year, right?
Yes, this is we just started the second year.
Okay.
And it's going.
So it would be very interesting to have another meeting and talk about specifically the other project. So I don't know. I'm going to open the lead to the rest of the audience if they would like to ask any question. Also, there are people following us in Facebook. So people in Facebook or people in Zoom, if you have students who have attended to the talk, if you would like to ask questions to Silvia, please feel free to ask any question. Anyone? Okay, we have a question from. Oh no, there's a question about another thing. I would like to ask you a question about your interest for learning languages, because I presume you also speak French.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Interesting.
I speak French. I also speak Bosnian or Serbo-Croatian. Sometimes it's
okay. Yes, I know why.
my husband is Bosnian.
Okay.
And I also, yes, French, because I studied there. And Chinese a little bit. I mean, not I don't think I should reach at least, I should have reached at least the intermediate level, but I don't think I'm there yet.
Okay.
So don't ask me things in Chinese, please, because
right. I was just starting about speaking Chinese, but good that you told me that.
So okay, my interest, impressive. I don't know where it came from. Amazing. The question was about my why, right? Why does it come
yes,
from?
Your interest. It's just because you like it.
I like it. You know that some people like some specific things or are good for different things. We all have the ability of learning languages, of course, but maybe some people are not so interested as some other people. I'm one of those who are interested, and that's why I have tried to learn, you know,
other
It's
languages?
a hobby, just as a hobby. No,
Okay, that's
not
terrific.
official. Yes.
I have a question or a commentary from Ochoa, from Monse Ochoa. She says that I believe that Mexican Sign Language should be taught in schools and jobs for people to be able to communicate with those people. What do you think of that?
Of course, you know why? I mean, that's an important step. It will be a really important step, you know, in understanding and including everyone in society.
Their first language?
It's actually it's very important because actually the law, I don't know the official English name for it, but the Ley General de Personas para Personas con Discapacidad, algo así se llama, it considers the Mexican Sign Language as one of the official languages in Mexico. I mean, we don't have, I mean, Spanish is not the only official language in Mexico, contrary to what many people might think. No, it's there together with, I mean, Spanish is there together with the sign language and with the indigenous languages. So there is no, like not a single, let's say, an official language of in Mexico is not Spanish, definitely. Just because the majority speak the language, it doesn't mean that it's the official language. So sign language is there at the same level as Spanish as the rest of the, I mean, the indigenous languages in Mexico. Actually, there is a very famous linguist. He's Boris Friedman. He says that let's say the situation of deaf people is similar regarding language, is similar to that of the people from the indigenous people, I mean, because they're also struggling so that their language is recognized as a full language. And hopefully in the near future, as soon as possible, we stop calling their languages dialects, because they are not dialects. They are, I mean, we need to respect, you know, not because we are the majority and we speak Spanish, should think that everyone should speak Spanish just because the majority speaks the language. I mean, it's part of the acceptance and the respect and the, respect for the human rights of people is the right to communicate in their natural or original language. So yes, that is another reason why, I think it should be taught in order to improve communication. And I'm also glad, really, really glad to know that sign language, or at least I know of some diploma that is offered in Flex, in your faculty, that is being offered in a faculty of languages instead of, I don't know, some kind of social center or, I don't know, anthropological center. No, it is a language.
Because it's the message that it's given, right?
Yes, yes. So it's not something, oh, fancy. Like I remember that, I don't know, maybe it's not the case now. I don't know, but I remember that a while ago, there were some Nahuatl courses, but they were not taught in they were not offered. Yes, they were offering, I don't know, the Centro de Antropología, no sé qué. No, so give the languages the respect, you know, give people respect for the languages. And if you're going to learn the language, do it in the same way that you, I mean, pay the same attention, the same effort as if you, I mean, as you do with the traditional languages that we learn in school, for example.
Okay. How nice. Thank you, Silvia. Anyone else would like to ask a question? More questions? No one else? Someone in Facebook? Well, it's in Saida Benavides. It's very interesting. Also, there are other commentaries. Great talk, Doctora Fajardo from Aaron Radillo. And Okay, Monse, again, it says, me gustaría que los maestros nos dieran un curso de lengua de señas, lenguaje de señas mexicana y de náhuatl. Okay, Monse, lo vamos a considerar. Vamos a invitar a la doctora Silvia que nos enseñe.
Just una observación, no sé si con español o en inglés, pero es lengua de
Lengua.
señas mexicana. El lenguaje es la habilidad que tenemos para desarrollar una lengua, pero es lengua de señas
Lengua
mexicana.
de señas mexicana. Thank you for...
And I was also telling that I feel so embarrassed when I am, working with deaf participants in the project, and I'm, ignorant of the language. I'm starting to learn. So if I mean, it's great that you are also interested in learning sign language, but I wouldn't be able to. I'm not able to teach you that.
Okay. When you learn that, you will be able to teach us.
Yes, hopefully.
Well, if there are no more questions, then I would like to thank you, Silvia, again for your time. I know you were busy and you were in a meeting, and you are always doing a lot of things. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation. It was just like a week ago that I sent you the invitation, and I hope this is not the last time, and we hope we can have you again in these talks, and you can probably tell us more about the details of the project, probably some of the results you have already gotten. And thank you very much for accepting, and thank you very much for this very interesting. I learned a lot from this talk, and I'm sure that the rest of the audience, including students, also learned a lot from the talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again.
Yes, Silvia, thank you very much. Para los estudiantes que están aquí acreditando horas de servicio culturales, aquí está el link en el chat, en donde se pueden inscribir, ¿de acuerdo? Muchas gracias, Silvia, gracias a todos, gracias, Jorge Zavala, gracias, Luquín, por hacer esto posible también, a la directora de la facultad, a los maestros, Nefer, gracias, Anita, y a los estudiantes, por supuesto, gracias por estar aquí presentes. Nos vemos. I hope I can see you next talk, probably mid-March or so. So thank you very much, and please join us. Join us during the next talk. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. See you next time.
Bye-bye.